Let's turn our attention now to the goings-on at Tembisa Hospital and what was found this week, a shocking development from the Special Investigating Unit, the SIU, which has uncovered massive corruption, a massive corruption scandal at Tembisa Hospital. In an interim report released earlier this week, the SIU revealed the devastating plunder of the public purse, exposing 3 coordinated syndicates that they say are responsible for looting over 2 billion rand. This sum, originally intended for vital healthcare services for the most vulnerable, was instead siphoned off through a complex web of fraud and corruption. The SIU's findings represent an egregious betrayal of public trust, highlighting widespread irregularities and corrupt activities involving both officials and service providers. Let's take the conversation forward. I'm joined from the Department of Health and Tembisa Hospital. The guests that join me, Jeffrey Wicks, investigative journalist, as well as Dr. Angelique Coetzee, just from a health practitioner's perspective. Jeff, let me start with you. The scale of the looting at Tembisa Hospital was already horrendous when Babita Diokaran was starting to do the work. Now we find out that it was beyond that in terms of the size of the amounts involved, more than 2 billion rand. Were you surprised that these are the sums that are involved?
Thank you for having me, and good afternoon. No, frankly, not surprised at all. We've understood for nearly a year at this point that the scale of what Babita Diokaran had first found at the facility had exceeded 2 billion rand. I think the value in the SIU's report this week is actually we now have a sense of which syndicates were due to be paid the most amount of money, and now we have a sense of how they each fit in terms of proximity and priority. I think it's also damning that, when we talk about 3 syndicates, that's 3 primary syndicates. There were 6 sub-syndicates. So that's a significant indictment on the probity of the Gauteng Health Department that 9 distinct entities or criminal networks were able to get their way in.
Dr. Angelique Coetzee, how devastating is all of this in the public healthcare system? We make the point about how strained that system already is, only to find out that actually, in some instances, at least in the instance of Tembisa Hospital, it wasn't really a lack of money. 2 billion rand is a lot of money. It was where that money was going. All right, Dr. Coetzee, I believe you may be muted on your side. So if you can just press the unmute button for me quickly. All right, we are battling with Dr. Angelique Coetzee. We'll come back to you in a moment, Doc, so while we get you sorted out. Jeff, talk to me about the presence of syndicates. You alluded to it, that there were the main syndicate and sub-syndicates. Draw the links for me between the issues around procurement, purchase orders, as well as the role of officials in all of this. What were the loopholes that made it possible for such a scheme to thrive at this one hospital?
So I think the way that the scheme was effected was particularly ingenious, but it also speaks to the total capture of a system. So we know that how this extraction was effected was through the 3 Coetzee system. The supply chain management officials engineered the process with a specific outcome in mind by pitting companies owned by one person against one another. So the entire value chain in the way procurement was done at that hospital was completely taken over by these suppliers. And we know that these officials didn't do it for free. 122 million rand channeled back to Gauteng health workers. So that again speaks to the depth and scale of the rot. And this is at a single hospital. And I think what should give us pause is that from our News 24 investigation and ultimately the book that has now been published, we understand that these syndicates were also operating in at least 5 other medical facilities in Gauteng. We reported recently that the Malmela Syndicate, the main player at Tembisa Hospital, had a financial interest in the Northwest Health Department. So I don't think we yet know how wide this systemic issue runs.
Doc, I believe we have you on a better line now. Hospitals are the last place you would expect syndicates to have been active. Yet, here we are. What does this represent for the public healthcare system?
Well, as you said, yet here we are. So what does it mean, especially for Tembisa Hospital? 2 billion rand could have roughly employed between 6,000 and 7,000 nurses or staffing. We could have bought 60 to 90 CT scanners. We could have bought tens of thousands of beds and neonatal incubators. Tangible improvement for a 840-bed hospital, which is under heavy pressure. So 2 billion meant for care was siphoned off through quote rigging and order splitting. The licensing from SAPRA that was supposed to be the gatekeeper was not adhered to. So it is dire consequences. It's the poor of the poor that is again at the bottom line of receiving healthcare, while other people drive very nice cars, have great houses, not giving a damn about the poor.
Dr. Coetzee, is there something in the structure of how governance and procurement happens in the public healthcare system that needs a relook? The spread of authority between provincial authorities, provincial health department, but also the hospital management and leadership themselves being able to take certain decisions. Is that where in that value chain some of these cracks are?
Yes, for sure. So if you look at the three-quote system, splitting of orders under the 500,000, and then certifying people that's non-compliant bidders, not following the SAPRA guidelines that's supposed to be following. So they have to do that. So we need to set aside any unlawful awards that has been given. We need to recover the funds. There must be, very importantly, disciplinary and criminal action. And we have to reinvest the recoveries into the staff, into the hospital, and into the backlogs that we have. So the question is, how did we get here? So the SIU found that there's a systemic bypass of tender rules, flawed three-quote RFQ processes, splitting orders, as I've just mentioned, and then those RFQs were even sent outside the central supplying databases. So we need to look at that. There was leadership. Leadership knew about this. The report says accounting officers abdicated their role. There needs to be accountability. And then the licensing, as I've said, from SAPRA, it was totally ignored.
Yeah.
And if I'm SAPRA, I will prosecute them.
Say a bit more. You will prosecute them. Say a bit more on that last point.
Yeah, SAPRA. SAPRA, we know that SAPRA already looked at 25 licenses. So 25 matters were already referred to SAPRA for suspected license breaches. So that actually means that some of those suppliers weren't legally authorized to handle regulated health products. Mm-hmm. It is a shame that hospital managers and HR and whoever is in this chain allowed something like this to happen.
Jeff, let me turn to you again. You've done extensive work, of course, while writing the book Shadow State, Why Babita Deokaran Had to Die. And I suppose in the backdrop, the conversation in the last few days must have suggested that Babita Deokaran has been vindicated. Has she? And has she been vindicated to the extent necessary?
Well, I think it's absolutely true that she has been vindicated. I mean, she was the one who saw the first signs of this thing when she tried to freeze money going to the suppliers of Tembisa Hospital and also initiate some sort of investigation. We know from our work that her warnings were never heeded. The money which she froze was eventually paid, and all of that happened after she'd been murdered. And bear in mind, the report that set this entire saga in motion was essentially a document which got her killed. So, and I think also it's important to remember how the health department reacted after that report eventually came to light. First, they denied its existence, and then they tried to question its legitimacy. So now I think this is a brilliant vindication. However, it cannot be the same as justice. Justice is something we've not yet seen, because the reality is it's been 4 years since Babita Deokaran was murdered, and not a single person has been arrested for the corruption at Tembisa Hospital. That is a significant shortfall in my view.
Yeah, I guess you sum up exactly what I was asking, whether the justice and vindication align in this instance. I've got to thank both of you for having joined me this afternoon. That's Jeffrey Wicks, an investigative journalist, as well as Dr. Angelique Coetzee, reflecting on the SIU report that has come through.